Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, thank you for having me. So this is a joint work with Vitor and Diogo, also from their colleagues from Portugal. And usual disclaimer applies that the views expressed in this presentation are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of Banco de Portugal. Okay, so let me introduce the paper. So it's that against the backdrop of a sudden and marked deterioration of the international economic and financial outlook, triggered by the Covid-19 pandemic, the macroprudential and microprudential authorities have been tasked to contribute to the public policy responses that aim to support the private and non-financial sector, ensuring that the balance between preserving financial stability and sustaining economic activity is maintained, as we all know. Two main measures taken by the various bodies were the temporary flexibility in complying with part of the capital requirements, with a view to encourage institutions to make use of their capital buffers, and the reduction in the level of some macroprudential buffers. And the idea behind this is that the principle of building up capital and liquidity buffers to deal with risk materializations underlies the regulatory changes in the wake of the previous international financial crisis, with the purpose of preventing procyclical behavior of the financial system during troubled times, which could exacerbate the effect of an adverse shock. So, to sum up, we had the shock, and authorities had released capital buffers in light of the evidence of the previous crisis. So, what we do in this paper, we contribute to a growing empirical literature on the effect of macroprudential capital buffers during the downturn of the business cycle by assessing the impact of the macroprudential measures implemented in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic at the European level. Important as well is that we do our analysis at the country level. So we are here comparing the evolution of credit across European countries. And what we find evidence that macroprudential buffers release contributed on average to mitigate the procyclicality of credit to households. Compared to countries that did not release buffers, credit growth to households was 1 percentage point higher on average in countries where there was a buffer release. Furthermore, our results suggest that the release of capital buffers contributed first to mitigate the impact that the containment measures and uncertainty underlying the development of the crisis had on households' investment decisions in form of mortgage, and second, to provide finance to loans to households for business purpose. However, the effect on consumption was muted. In addition, the aggregate housing lending, we find that the effect for both the release of the CCYB and that of the systemic risk buffer was positive. However, the results suggest that for credit associated to small business purpose, only the release of the CCYB had an effect. So this was, in a nutshell, the results of our paper. So let me jump in now on how do we find these results. So, as I said, in our paper, we want to compare countries, the evolution of credit growth between countries, between countries that had released the buffer against countries that had not released the buffer. So let's take the case of Estonia, for instance, which had the release of the systemic risk buffer in the period. So this chart plots the stock of loans from July 2019 until August 2020. And the solid line is the evolution of credit in Estonia. And the vertical line splits the time between before the release and after the release. So one way to a naive approach of evaluating the impact is to compare, to take a pool of countries that had not released the buffer, take their average and compare to this evolution with the evolution of Estonia. However, as we can see in this plot, this approach is not suitable because even before the release, the evolution of those two groups of countries, in this case Estonia versus all the other countries that had not released the buffer, was different already. So in this case, we would be then overestimating the impact of the buffer release. So how would you go about? We use the synthetic control method that was developed by Abadi and Gardezabal 2003, and then later extended in Abadi, Diamond, and Heimüller 2010. And the idea of this method is to take the same pool of countries that had not released the buffer for the control countries, and assign weights in such a way that we recreate the evolution of the treated country, in this case Estonia, with these control groups. And we, in the method, assign the weights using credit growth predictors. And in the case in Estonia, then we would have the method would give us the dotted line, which is the synthetic control, and because we only use the period before the release to compute those weights, we can then take the difference between those two lines after the release as the treatment effect. So in our case in Estonia, the treatment effect of buffer release can be calculated as the difference between the solid line and the dotted line. So okay, so having explained the method, we need to now I'll go through the data. So as I said, we analyze country level data set in Europe. So we take the sample of all European countries, but we still need to select which countries we would analyze, mostly because this is a period that's very challenging. Not only buffer release happened, so we had first the COVID shock. Several measures were implemented during this period to contain all the problems related to the crisis. And if we do not account for those differences, then we cannot be sure that the method is unbiased, right? Because then something else could be driving this difference between the evolution of those two countries, of the country that we analyze and this its synthetic control. So first, in our strategy, what we do, we focus on households. That's because to minimize the confounding effects of state guaranteeing loans, that was mainly to support non-financial corporations. Second, because we use we then focus to households, we exclude countries that had a higher share of a higher use of moratorium, and also then to remove the potential effect of the containing measures across countries. So in order to have like a more homogeneous group of countries in this dimension, we also exclude countries where the containing measures were the most and least severe in the SEPA period. So then we end up with a group of 7 treated countries. Those were that released some buffer in the period. Those are Denmark, Estonia, Lithuania, the Netherlands, Poland, Slovakia, and Sweden. Some of them had released the CCYB, others the systemic risk buffer. And after the selection of countries, we end up with another 7 controls in the control group. These are Austria, Belgium, Germany, Greece, Latvia, Luxembourg, and Slovenia. Also, for the purpose of the present study, the policy intervention was assumed to occur in March 2020, and this is taking into account the ECB press release on 12 March of 2020, which they announced that they provide a temporary capital and operational relief to banks. So this coincided pretty much with the time that the pandemic was declared worldwide.
Lucas, you're running out of time.
I'm running out of time? Okay. Okay, that's for 50 minutes is very short. Okay. Oh, no problem. I thought I was being actually too quick. Okay, so, and pretty much so just to sum up, the post-treatment period goes from March 2020 to August 2020, and the pre-treatment period goes from July 2019 and February 2020. So this is just country by country. Pretty much this table, what shows is that the method varies considerably across countries. So not just the effect, the estimated effect, it goes from 0.45 percentage points for Denmark to 3.2 percentage points for Poland, but also the quality of the model. So for Denmark, the error that the synthetic group relative to the actual series is very low, but then for Sweden it's much higher. So what we do, because here we're not interested in analyzing each country separately. So what we do, we follow ASEMO 2016 and Bergen 2020, and we calculate an average treatment effect across all the effects, the country level effects. And this is, we just sum up the treatment effect for each country, but weighted by the error, the root mean square predicted error before the release. So yeah, I'll try to be quick here. Pretty much by doing this aggregation, what we find is that between March and August 2020, credit to households grew 0.99 percentage points more in countries where capital buffers were released compared to the counterfactor with no release. The effect is statistically significant at the 5% level for most of the period. Then we split the treated countries between those that had released a CCYB and those that released a systemic risk buffer. And the effect is pretty much the same, but we lose some of the statistical significance, especially for the countries that had released a CCYB.
So Lucas,
okay,
we're also going to die here, right? So we're a little bit late already.
Hey, I'm waiting. Okay, I can see my.
Yeah. So
okay. Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. It's indeed.
I think you made the main point. No.
Okay. I just want to show that for house purchase the effect is the model doesn't perform that well. For credit for consumption, we see no effect, which I think it's in line with what we expect during the pandemic. But the effect to other lending, which include lending for other business, the effect was very strong, and especially for among the countries that released a CCYB. Okay, I'll not conclude. I think it's just I'll just repeat myself and just say that the results are robust to several changes in the specification and other tests. Okay, I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to invite Kip. You're here, my former colleague Kip from the Danish Central Bank. The floor is yours, Kip.
Okay, thanks. Let me just see if I can find some slides here. Okay. So you can see the slides?
Yep.
Okay. I have only 3 slides, so I will do it quickly. So first, thanks for getting this opportunity to discuss this interesting paper. This is my 1-page summary of my understanding of the paper. Your main objective is to find out, can we see a causal effect on credit growth of the buffer release during this pandemic? And so basically you compare countries that released the buffers with the countries that didn't release the buffer. But then since no countries are alike, then you can just compare 2 countries. Then you make use of this synthetic control method, where you can, the way I understand it is that you can see each country as a bundle of characteristics, and then you compare one country with a linear combination of other countries in order to get the best match of characteristics. So for instance, Sweden is compared not only to Germany, but only to 78% Germany, and then 18% Latvia, and also 3% Greece. So and I'll come back to this synthetic control method. I think it's fine. I know that a lot of people have issues with that because it can be difficult to interpret the results. But then your key findings, you find a clear effect of the buffer release, and you mentioned this nice figure that credit growth to households was around 1% higher in countries that released the buffer than compared to countries that didn't. And then you show a lot of robustness checks that your results are fairly robust to change the estimation window. You try to leave out one country or a time, and you also look at the euro area countries in isolation, and that's a way to control for monetary policy and macroprudential policy. So I think it's a very timely and interesting paper. You have a lot of nice charts in the paper, so you showed a couple of them to us today. Otherwise, I would just recommend that people flip to the paper and see these very convincing charts. And you have shown that they are quite robust to a number of robustness checks. But I think what can you do more? I think that it would be nice if you could try to control a little more for factors that affect the household's credit demand. For instance, what about development in unemployment in the different countries? Or you can say different public support measures to prevent unemployment and thereby income to fall too much in the household sector. It could, for instance, be wage compensation schemes that aims to keep people in job. It could be higher unemployment benefit during the period. And then more generally, I think it would be nice if you could try to control for differences in fiscal policy across the countries. And I think that some of these suggestions here, it should be fairly easy for you to get data from the Commission or the OECD to get some harmonized figures in these areas. So my final slide here is, I think it's a great paper, and it's very timely. I think that it would be nice if you could, as a kind of robustness check, see if you could replicate the study using some of the EBA's nice bank level data. That could also be a way, to, if you can see that, if you can show that the results also hold when you use bank level microdata, then I think that, you will have a much stronger position against those who are critical of the synthetic control method. So that's basically my comments. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kim.
Thank you.
I have one question, right? Here, the question is from Christina Silla. And basically, and I think they are in the same vein as what Kim is trying to say to you here, right? How much of the effect that you document can be solely explained by releasing of capital buffers? So this is a little bit the same vein, right?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for the discussion, Kim, and thank you for the question. So the idea is that so our whole strategy rely on having been able to create a group of, selecting a group of countries that were similar enough before the introduction or the release of buffer. So then when we compare after the release, the effect it can only be explained by the release. Of course, as Kim pointed out, there are several other factors that could have played, like direct scheme support for households that could have affected demand. We could have control for those, but I think also because we are in our results, we are looking at a very short time span, and given the results that were very strong for other purpose and not for household mortgage, for instance. I think then our results are highlighting this need for liquidity. So then I think some of the schemes that we fiscal support might not be a problem. My point is that they will not affect the effect.
So I think we have a different type of question, which is a little bit more on your sample choices here, right? That being asked by Frederick Vogler. Please explain how you define that a country largely used other measures and was thus excluded from the comparator group. Can you?
Yeah. Pretty much we just took the distribution of the usage of, for instance, moratorium, and then we removed those above the 90th percentile. And of course, then we just look at the distribution, and you can clearly see at some point we have like a spike in usage, and then we define the 90th percentile to exclude those. No? And we did this approach for direct grants and also for the container measures.